All right. Okay. Paragraph 3. This is one of the big differences, and this makes it so that also something to understand. You cannot use the MR financing addendum with the GCAAR contract. And here's why is that, and this is kind of a nuance that sometimes has caught some people out when they're mixing forms together. For the financing, GCAAR uses these percentages. MR uses actual numbers for the financing. And this creates an issue when you get to your financing addendums. But just as a rule, just know, do not use the MR financing addendum with the GCAAR contract. It's missing a lot of information when you do it that way. So one of the really nice things with the GCAAR contract, because you're using percentages, if the sales price changes, you only have to change the sales price in one location. Sometimes what happens in MR contract is you wind up having to change the numbers in the financing addendum as well as the sales price. So this kind of eliminates the need for having a lot of extra changes when you're modifying just the sales price. Because in most cases, this financing stays the same, the structure of the financing. If it's an 80-20 and the seller counters you $10,000 higher, typically the buyer is going to keep an 80-20 and just pay that percentage more. All right. Any questions on that? So C.
I have a question. Is the second trust? The second trust is like if someone is using the down payment assistance?
Yeah, so technically, if there is a separate trust involved that's going to need its own contingency, then you'd need to put that there is a second deed of trust. The MMP program, if it's like a grant, some of those aren't necessarily a second trust. It's more they're part of the first trust's kind of program and qualification. But typically what we see is sometimes people, and I don't know if we're still doing them quite as much. In some cases, they make sense as like a 80-10-10, where you have an 80% first, there is a 10% second, then 10 down. Sometimes that is if a purchaser is, let's say they're going non-contingent, but they're selling their primary residence. Once they pay off the primary residence, they're going to pay off that extra 10%. And again, that's a great question to talk to your lender about, to figure out, maybe it makes sense to, some loan programs have a way to recast the loan so that you can go in 90-10, pay down once you pay off the house, once you sell the house, and then bring the balance down, and then they recast the loan off the new amortization. So I get this question a lot in this marketplace for C. What happens sometimes is buyers are going cash, right? They're going non-contingent on financing, but they still reserve the right. They still want to have financing in here. So I get this, do I still put a conventional financing addendum in or not? And the answer is no, you would not have a financing contingency nor a financing addendum. They contradict themselves, right? If your intent is to go and be non-contingent on financing cash, right? But your buyer is going to get some type of financing. They're going to leverage the low interest rate market and retain their cash. Is that you can either handwrite in here or other parts in the contract put in, buyer reserves the right to apply for and pursue financing of the property. And you can just, wearing a belt with your suspenders say, and this contract is not contingent on such financing. Make sense? Because the problem you might run into is if you're completely silent on the financing, you have no rights to get an appraiser in there. You have no, and that's kind of really the big one. So if the seller won't allow you to have a lender go in there and you've asked, you don't have anything set up to allow the lender to get in there, potentially you could get snagged by not having that.
Oh, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So if the buyer, because right now the market is that everybody gives all the contingencies. So if the buyer, choose this company is not competing on financing, but at the end of the day, because of appraisal or whatever reason, they cannot get the full loan amount as they get promised, will they lose their earnest money? Or they must find money to fund this transaction to let it go through, or otherwise they get sued or something.
Yeah. So if they don't have any contingencies and they're basically now they cannot get their financing and they went in without a financing contingency.
Yes.
Yeah. They, in the black and white of it, yes, they would potentially lose their earnest money deposit because there's no language or structure that allows them to get out for that reason.
Yeah. Okay.
Good question. Other questions about financing, what's going on with the current market? All righty. All right. Deposit. And this is a really kind of interesting one. And this dynamic has been changing a lot with what happens with deposits. So I would tell you as real estate agents, like one of your legal duties in the contract is the handling of funds, right, for your clients. And this is one where agents can get caught out and get into a lot of trouble if they've done this incorrectly. Because again, the public trust relies on us to do this is part of the contract. If you are the brokerage is holding the deposit, the responsibility falls with the agent and the brokerage to make sure that the funds are handled properly and by the state laws. So buyer's deposit amount of X shall be held by whoever the escrow agent is. If it's the broker, you don't need any other agreement. If it's the title company or someone else, you'll need the MLTA escrow addendum attached to the contract. That lays out the ground rules for what happens when a non-real estate broker is holding the funds. Buyer has delivered, right? You have the check in hand or will deliver within X number of days of ratification. Again, this says if the property is in Maryland and broker is the escrow agent, the deposit must be delivered to escrow agent within 3 days of ratification. So Maryland law says if we're holding them as the real estate broker, deposits must be in as soon as possible, but no later than 7 days. Our office policy has always been get them to us no later than 5 days, because then we've got to put them through. So here's why I bring this up. And again, we're starting to see the marketplace shift where a lot more title companies are holding the deposits. But if we are holding it, and let's say we're coming up on day 7 and we still have not gotten the deposit from the buyer, buyers may be like, hey, let's wait till we get the results from the home inspection. Hey, let's wait till we get the results from the appraisal. This creates a big issue for you all as the agents. If we don't get that deposit on the 7th day, we need to notify the other side that we do not have the deposit. What happens in the state of Maryland after day 7, if we haven't raised our hands, we haven't let anyone know, that responsibility falls with the agent and the brokerage. We recently had a case where someone, basically this woman had been going around putting offers on properties, and she claimed she was a doctor and was always too busy to go to the home inspection, always too busy to get the deposit to the agent, and then would never, basically it just all fell apart all the time. We had one case where our agent diligently pursued getting the deposit from the buyer, but never notified the listing agent. Contract fell apart, of course, and there was no deposit for the seller to go after. So they filed a complaint with the state. The state came out with a $35,000 fine against our agent. Through the investigation process, we were able to negotiate and bring that fee way down. But it wasn't for lack of trying. I mean, it was really a scary situation for our agent because she was faced with a major penalty from the state. So the state does not take this very lightly. So again, I don't mean to scare you guys too much, but when it comes to deposits, just realize that it becomes very serious if there's a problem. And sometimes we're trying to cover for our buyer, right? Like maybe it's just, having an issue transferring funds from a savings account to the checking account or whatnot. But if you do come across that 7-day threshold, you got to let the listing side know. And it may blow the contract up, but at that point, it's out of your control and you've got to notify someone.
So as long as you notify, that's like your safety net?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You've done what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, there's things you cannot perform on this contract, but the parts you can perform on, which is basically, if I don't have the money, I need to let someone know.
Mhm.
Yep. When it comes to these deposits going to title companies, this is where, as a listing agent, the title company, we've had some situations where the title company never notified anyone that they didn't get the funds, right? They felt that it was only their job to notify people when they did get the funds. So as the listing agent, follow up with the title company, make sure that they've gotten the funds, right? Like if there's a 7-day period where they're supposed to have the funds, make sure you're following up with them. That's happened, because your seller client will expect that. All right. Any questions on deposits?
Question, what are the pros and cons of, giving the deposit to the broker or the title company? What are the major, difference?
So with in the MLTA form has kind of helped at least even the playing field as to some rules of engagement. As a broker, we have a very, if there's a deposit dispute, we have very specific rules that we have to follow.
Mhm.
Basically, we can send out a 21-day letter, is what we call it. We have to notify the other party. Let's say buyer got out on financing, seller's really mad about it and doesn't want to release the deposit.
Mhm.
We can send a letter to the seller on behalf of us as the escrow holder.
Okay.
And if the seller does not respond to that letter in 21 days,
Mhm.
we can release the deposit back to the buyer.
Okay,
Um,
so that's more protecting the buyer.
it can protect, there's a process, right?
Yeah,
That if that doesn't work, we can also go to a system called Interpleader.
Mhm.
Interpleader allows, what Interpleader does is it as the broker, we wound up creating a lawsuit, suing the buyer and seller to resolve their dispute. We take out, it costs us probably about $2,000 to file an interpleader. We can take
Yeah.
out 500 of that
Okay.
to file the interpleader. And that's where it gets into, like, when there is a deposit issue, how you negotiate those. And again, this is where setting expectations for the seller, I think, is really important as the listing agent, and also for the buyer too. And that issues come up, right? Like, and I get it, sellers get upset that a deal's falling apart and want to take it out on the buyer's deposit. But at the end of the day, it's rarely is it a very fruitful expedition to, tie up properties, tie up funds, because there are penalties. If a seller was supposed to release a deposit and they don't, the buyer could sue them for damages.
Yeah.
The courts tend to, at least from our experience, the courts, some judges will read the contract by the letter, others won't.
Mhm.
So it's always best to try to work these things out before then,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes that means maybe it is knowing that the buyer, to get their deposit back, they're going to have to spend some money potentially. Sometimes it is negotiating, right? Like, whether you love it or not, it becomes a business decision.
Mhm.
So with the, if it's on the title side, they don't have this specific procedure with the 21-day letter or the interpleader,
Mhm.
but they might have adopted that within their their law firm that that's how they do it. There's a little bit of a risk that the settlement attorney is going to have their own rules on how they notify parties or don't notify parties regarding issues. Ours are set by the state, so it's very specific. And you'll find a lot of brokerages, and I'll tell you, like, we offer it as a service for our agents that will hold the deposits. I find that very rarely are brokers allowing this, just because it's an accounting issue. And it's also, if there's a dispute, we're the ones in the middle. And no one's happy with us, you know? But sometimes we also see it's our role and we want to help. And if we can at least, you know, we've got to deliver bad news, we'll deliver it and help the client through it and at least let them know what their options are. All right, funds due at settlement. That's pretty simple.
Joe, sorry.
Yep.
You talk about a 7-day grace period to deposit the EMD.
Uh-huh.
So what happens if the contract says 3 days, within 3 days? And
Yeah,
after 3 days?
Yep. So the buyer would still have to get it in within, I mean, they'd have to comply with the contract with that 3-day period. You know, the state law is going to trump what the contract says. I mean, this is good practice. I think 3 days, the sooner the better. But I would stick to what the contract says. But again, if you're working with your client and, you know, it's just a matter of moving some funds around, just keep in mind, though, that there is a hard and fast 7-day stop.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, settlement. And this is different. MR doesn't have a place to call out the settlement agent. GCAAR does. This does create disputes sometimes, right? Especially in today's day and age market, where this becomes a negotiable part of the contract, where we're filling in who the settlement agent is. And buyer agrees to contact settlement agent within 10 days of ratification to schedule settlement and to place title order. Again, that's really important. If there is any title issues, it's good to get those in front of the title company as soon as possible. All right. Property condition, maintenance condition. So GCAAR gives you 3 different options for when and where to determine property condition. So, except as otherwise specified, seller will deliver the property at settlement vacant, free and clear of trash and debris, broom clean, and substantially the same physical condition as determined as of the date of home inspection. I'm sorry, date of offer, date of home inspection, or other. So, a couple quick things on that. And we run into this, like, you know, junk in the attic, junk in the storage shed. We've even had yard debris, right? I mean, there's a little bit of a gray area on some of these things. You know, and I've also had situations where clients are just trying to be nice, like they just had the house painted and they leave 3 cans of the paint that they used. And buyers freak out that the house is supposed to be completely vacant, free and clear. So kind of in your checklist, I always say, like, coming into settlement, if there's questions the seller has, like, hey, would they like the terracotta planters that are out on the back patio? Like, raise your hand, ask the buyer's agent, do you want these things, right? Like, let them tell you yes or no. If not, I hope you have a large SUV that you can start taking stuff out of listings on settlement day. When your client refuses to take it out, the buyer refuses to settle. Typically, it's going to be the listing agent who is up in the hot and sweaty attic in their suit, bringing rolls of carpet down and things like that. So always ask. The other nuance in this: date of offer, date of home inspection, or other. So MR contract sets it as the date of offer. There's also this other, right? So what is other? And I'll get into this in 1 second. So Date of offer, basically the contract, the condition of the property is almost in a sense, let's say you sealed it, that this is what the property will be like when we go to settlement. The refrigerator worked, washer dryer worked, AC worked, they will work at settlement. Date of home inspection is the one that's a lot more practical when you are having home inspections, because now you've got a report that actually called out what the exact physical condition of the property was, what worked and what didn't work. Other, and this was confusing because we even had, when this clause came out years and years ago, we had some settlement attorneys who kind of messed this one up. Other is a situation where you could put date of settlement. That means that the condition of the property could continue to change all the way up until when the buyer purchased the property. That's like a shell, let's say, where, you know, there's a hole in the roof and the drywall is getting ruined every day coming up to settlement, but that's the buyer, that's what the buyer's buying. That would be date of settlement situation. That's very rare. All right, any questions on that?
So for right now, if the house has waived the home inspection, then it means by default, we should check the date of offer, right?
Correct. Yep. And it says failure to select an option in the preceding sentence shall be deemed to have been date of offer option. I sit on GCAAR Contract and Clauses Committee. I've been on the committee probably about 8 of the last 15 years. I'm very partial to the GCAAR contract just because I know what goes into it to be written. They're really good at things like this. Failure selection option means this, right? Because they understand out in the marketplace, things get missed. So a lot of times there's a lot of these clauses that are already kind of taken care of if something's missed. Seller to have the utilities on. Also, seller will have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors installed and operational prior to settlement in accordance with the requirement of the jurisdiction. So this is something we call contracting around the law. So you must, it doesn't matter what the buyer and seller agree to, you must comply with the smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector laws. So the seller must have no older than 10-year-old smoke detectors. They must be appropriately located based on when the home was built. And there's a really good, if you just Google smoke detector law, Maryland, there's a really good matrix that shows you kind of based on the age of the property. Do they have, you know, and right now on every single level, there needs to be one. But depending on when it was built, it could be in every bedroom, outside every bedroom, hardwired versus battery. So that's something, regardless of what the contract says, those have to be complied with. And then buyer acknowledges and accepts the property, you know, in as is condition, including the electrical, plumbing, heating, air conditioning, fixtures, and systems. All right, any questions on property condition? All right. Inclusions, exclusions, this is different in GCAAR versus MR. This drives me absolutely insanely nuts about MR. So in MR, you will get a disclosure package that the seller will send you inclusions, exclusions list. It's only signed by the seller, and there's a clause in there that says that this cannot be attached to the contract, which I think is the dumbest thing. Like, now what you're relying on is the buyer's agent / buyer to transcribe everything from that inclusions, exclusions list onto the MR contract and hope to God they don't get it wrong, right? And then it takes the listing agent to reevaluate that list. I think it's a pretty simple list. I think if the seller disclosed what they intend to include or exclude in the property, the buyer reviews it one time, makes any modifications to that, counters it if they have a counter to it, right? As opposed to redoing the list over again. I just think it creates an opportunity for an issue and a mistake. It just invites a mistake. So that's my 2 cents on that. So inclusions, exclusions, GCAAR, you've got a separate addendum. seller fills it out and signs it, buyer reviews it and countersigns it. MR is done differently. 10, home warranty. This is where you'd put a home warranty if there was one included. We actually just had a really good presentation from Cinch. And some things that savvy buyers are doing is actually putting home warranties in place on properties at the time of contract, and it covers the seller during that warranty period too, for some items. So I don't know if you guys are using warranties that way or not, but there are some creative ways to potentially get some coverage issues. Again, if you're doing a contract with no home inspection, right, the last thing you want to do is your buyer moves in, and the day they move in, something's not working, right? And they bought a home warranty the day of settlement. Warranty companies do not like to have, 1 day coverage, 1 day claim, right? Like it just looks like everyone knew there was a problem. But if that policy had been in place 45 days earlier when the contract was placed on the property, there's a higher likelihood they're going to cover it with 46 days under warranty than as opposed to 1 day.
So right
Yep.
now, because the market is so hot, it's a seller's market.
Yep.
So shall we recommend the buyer to purchase a home warranty just for their own sake, because the sellers are unlikely to provide it right now?
Yeah, sellers are unlikely to provide it.
Yeah.
It's not going to fix everything,
Yeah, of
right?
course.
But I think it definitely gives you some more leeway, gives you some more options.
Okay.
They're not perfect, right?
Yeah.
But I think again, it's what we're starting to see is a lot of issues coming back to us on buyers who bought properties without home inspections and sellers filling out disclaimer statements.
Exactly.
That we're not getting a whole lot of information about the property condition. The only way for the buyer to get the property would have been to go non-contingent on home inspection. So the home warranty might help in some of those situations. So, they're not perfect though, right? They're not going to solve every problem.
And also, when you mentioned the 45 days, do you mean before or after the settlement
So,
date? Let's say the
yep.
settlement date is February 1st, which is like tomorrow. So should the home warranty they purchase like 45 days before or after February 1st?
So once you get ratified, you can put it under home warranty and with seller coverage. So the property has been warranted for longer, which creates a more likelihood that things will be covered if issues crop up right after settlement.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, just I guess I need an example.
So again, today is
ratify the contract day, and with the settlement date will be April 1st.
Yep.
So what do you recommend the home warranty to be in effect?
So I would have the buyer place the warranty now. If they know, if they're committed, they're going to get a warranty, place the warranty now on the property so that there is a coverage period established, right? So that if there is a claim on April 2nd, April 3rd, right, it's been covered for
a couple.
Yeah.
Already. Okay. I see.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Joe, the way I do, I always recommend home warranty. I think all of my clients use that. But the way I do it, I always tell them to buy it. Like when they are under contract, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before closing, they call the company, like explaining I'm buying, I'm under contract. The settlement day is like, let's say next Monday. That's when I want my policy to start. And that's how I always do. I don't know if it's good, it's bad, but we don't start it earlier because I'm like, who's paying for it? Like before the closing, that house doesn't belong to my client yet. So why they have to pay for like 3 weeks before? And so that's how I do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a seller warranty period, so you can put it on the property where the property's been covered. It covers the seller for any claims that happen during the contract period. And I think it's a little more expensive to do it that way. If you just do buyer coverage, then you lose some days of coverage. But I think you also increase the likelihood that claims will be covered. So I think that's a personal decision that, your buyer is going to have to make.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Another difference between the two, getting on to paragraph 12, is your wood destroying insect inspection. So just a couple things in here, and this has been a little bit of a change for those of y'all who've been in the business a while. This has changed. So buyer will furnish the seller a written report from a licensed pest company firm showing that all dwellings and or garages within the property are free of visible evidence of live WDI, wood destroying insects, and free of any visible WDI damage. Here's the nuances on this. So what was happening in the past is inspection companies were putting on any previous WDI infestation. So now they've added in GCAAR, they've added this word live, right? That it has to be live activity. In MR, it says present. And I'm not, again, I hate showing my bias, but I absolutely detest the MR contract for certain reasons. And this is one of them, present versus live. I think live makes it really clear. Present, I'd assume that it's live, but it could be argued another way. So I don't like the use of the word present versus live. But I think the intent is there that it's supposed to be damage that is current. The other thing is this free from visible WDI damage. So you could have had a property that had infestation 30 years ago, right? But there is damage still in one of the, like in the garage, in one of the beams, or in one of the 2x4s. The seller is responsible for that damage now. And sometimes that's a gotcha moment, right? Because seller may say, look, it's free of any visible, or it's free of any infestation. This is ancient, right? But now they're on the hook to start doing some carpentry work. This used to say structural damage, right? And then that got kind of a gray area as to what's structural, what's not. Do we have to call it a structural engineer? But anyways, it's visible WDI damage. So, a couple strategies, there's these WDI inspections are about $35 to $50. Does it make sense to have your seller go ahead and get an inspection done on the property prior to settlement? At least they know if there's any issues that would come up. That might be a good strategy to kind of uncover any issues. But just keep in mind that prior damage is still the seller's responsibility. Make sense?
So are you saying that once the buyer paid for the test, if we found anything wrong, the seller is responsible to fix it?
Correct.
But if we don't do anything, then we kind of have lost opportunity, and we will pay for it if there's something we found out after the contract is ratified.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And the way this works is this is built into the contract. There is no negotiation of this unless you change that. So the seller's on the hook to do that treatment and repair if there's treatments and repairs notified by the inspection company. A couple things, just like I got caught out one time. There was a pile of firewood that had termites in it. And all it had to do is just take the firewood out. If we'd done that ahead of time, it would have prevented. But once it got notified, the underwriter had it, they required that the property be tested. I thought I was really smart, and I had my contractor take the firewood out. I called in another WDI company to try to balance out and say, well, now there weren't any termites. They found powder post beetles. So now I had to pay for the powder post beetle that didn't come up in the first report. So again, my advice to you guys is get it resolved ahead of time, right? Like if you see around a property, there are, damages or there's things that are existing, right? Exclude them from the contract, right? In the inclusions, exclusions, or in the contract put in that the seller will not repair the termite damage in the garage. Sheds, right? So this says all dwellings and garages within the property. So that could be a little shed that's like in the back corner of the property, right? That's, you know, a half acre away from the property. Now you're required to treat this little shed. So if there are things like that, make sure that they get excluded. MR, I believe it's 10 linear feet from the property. Any fencing and structures that are not attached but are within 10 feet. Let me double check that to make sure before I give you that stat.
Well, you have it in here.
Yeah, this is a little bit older. Let me just double check and make sure that they have not changed it. Shall apply to the garage or within 3 feet of the garage, whether attached or detached, any outbuildings located within 3 feet of the residence or garage, and a maximum of 10 linear feet of the nearest portion of a fence. The other thing with MR, they put a cap on the seller damages and treatments at 2%. I don't know of any, many situations where we've exceeded that 2%. So it's rare that would ever have to come into effect. So I'll leave it at that. Any questions on termite?
Just that the as-is addendum, if you have to use that, like I'm seeing some of these properties in Anne Arundel, a lot of them being sold as is.
Yep.
I have to use that addendum just to remind everybody that you're exempt. I mean, unfortunately, your buyer is not protected by this.
Correct.
Because you have to strike through that.
Yep.
That and property condition.
Yep.
Just FYI.
All right. Paragraph 13, this is lead-based paint. So lead-based paint rules, these are federal rules. These apply across both contracts. All righty. Okay. 14, financing application. If this contract is contingent on financing, buyer will make written application for specified financing and any lender required property insurance no later than 7 days after ratification. A couple things in here. Wherever you see a capital letter, it usually means that this word is specifically it's referenced somewhere in the contract. So we always talk about like lender, capital L lender, means that lender is the one who wrote the lender's letter, right? It'll be defined somewhere in the contract. So a couple things in here. In paragraph 14 is within 7 days, the buyer needs to make a written application with their lender. In MR, that blank is left open for negotiation, right? You can put 3 days, 1 day, 7 days, 14 days, whatever you want in here. The other thing is this property insurance. So the buyer has a contingency if the property, let's say it's a property that has had 1 million insurance claims against it. It's had a fire. It's had all these things. Property might be more expensive to insure. Or if there is flood, right? If the property is in a floodplain, they redid a lot of the flood zone maps a couple of years ago, and properties that weren't in flood zones became in flood zones, and people got caught out with extra insurance. If the buyer had done their application with property insurance company in that first 7 days, they were protected. If they hadn't done it in that first 7 days, they're not protected. So a couple things, like in my process, always have my buyer get a clue report right after we, even potentially before we ratify, but no later than right after we ratify, I tell them, go get a clue report. on the property from their insurance company. The clue report is a comprehensive loss underwriting something. Basically, it's like a used vehicle history report for homes. It'll tell, was there any fire claims, flood claims, roof claims. So it gives them some good information, especially if you're not getting, like, you got a disclaimer statement, you can't have a home inspection, right? Like, but now you know, like, oh crap, like the property's had a fire, right? It's had a major flood. And the other thing is that it fulfills this requirement to make sure that you've applied for insurance. Any questions on that?
What's the turnaround time for that usually?
Instantaneous. So we use congressional insurance for our company. I use them personally. I used to have USAA, and they did a much better job doing a package price than USAA could. And they'll do them all the time for you. You know, if your client has Geico or USAA or some other companies, a lot of times they're like, well, we can't do that. The seller has to do that. And that's not true. So that's where I get a chance to make sure that they talk to my lender and my insurance guy too. But it's instantaneous. Yeah. Okay. So here's a little nuance with this. So, and what I tell my clients, let's say you've got a client who is shopping, right? They're like, they're doing 80-20 conventional financing. They went to Stephen at McLean, like his program, but you know, their cousin told them that they went to Rocket Mortgage and were able to get an 80-20 financing for an eighth of a point less, right? And I was telling my buyers, like, look, like, we need to get pre-approved. You have a period. If you want to do some shopping, you can do some shopping in that first 7 days. And this allows you during your application period. If you want to change lenders, you can change lenders during this 7-day period. You can't change loan programs. You can't go from conventional to VA or go from 80-20 to 95-5. But you can change from Sandy Spring to McLean banks. So that's something just to keep in mind. If you do that, I always recommend notify the listing agent that you have done this, right? Because you potentially lose your protection in the financing contingency if you haven't notified them during that 7-day period. Make sense?
Joe, so do you mind saying it again, please?
Yep. So you have a 7-day application period for your financing. During that 7-day application period, the buyer can switch lenders as long as it's the same loan program. But if you do switch lenders, I'd highly recommend, it doesn't say in here, but I would highly recommend notifying the listing agent that we have switched lenders during that 7-day application period. So that if there ever is a question as to, well, now you're using a totally different lender, I would have never accepted your offer if I knew you were going to use Rocket Mortgage. If it was done during that 7-day period, unfortunately, the seller listing agent really doesn't have a say in who you go with, as long as this is the same program.
And that 7-day period doesn't reset, right?
Doesn't reset, meaning,
Like as soon as they pick another lender. the
Oh,
seller doesn't
yeah,
have an extra
No,
7 days.
no.
Okay.
You're right. Yeah, good question. So that 7-day period is the 7-day period. If they pick a different lender, it doesn't change the timing.
Mhm.
All right. Any questions on that? And here's something, when it gets into alternative financing, right? We hear about this a lot. Let's say the buyer puts 80-20 in the contract, but you know, the rates came down on a 10-1 arm, right? Now they want to look at an arm. They can do that. They can apply for alternative financing as long as it doesn't cost the seller anything or delay settlement. The couple things to keep in mind though is that in MR, if you're using an MR contract, you must pursue the financing that you came into the contract with. You can pursue alternative, but you must pursue both on the same path. That means you'd potentially have 2 appraisals, let's say. in GCAAR, they allow you to stop the process. If you are going to go alternative financing, they allow you to, you don't have to concurrently run both programs. You can stop and change horses and just go with the other alternative financing program. Small nuance.
Oh,
Yep.
So with MR, you have to continue with 2 lenders?
Yep. Technically, the way it's written is that you must continue both programs.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I knew that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's buried in there, but that's
Has that
the,
ever happened to you? Did you have to? No? Okay.
yeah, and most times people don't do that.
Yeah.
Right. And most sellers don't want 2 appraisals. And so it's, you
That
know,
happened to me one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
15, damage or loss. This is always something to talk to your seller clients about. And I talk to my clients about, especially when it comes to like, you know, utility companies and insurance, right? Like, and I have sellers who are like literally like cut off the power like at 12 noon, settlements at 11 a.m., right? Like cancel their insurance. I would say like just these are minor, these are dollars and cents. And sometimes if settlement got delayed or there was a problem, and sometimes the utility company cut off the power at 10 a.m. instead of 11 a.m., right? It could create a big issue. So just always recommend your seller clients, like keep the insurance on for just a couple extra days, right? Might cost them $30, but if there was a problem, they're going to be so thankful they have that extra coverage. Also, keep the utilities, you know, make sure that you have a transfer, not a cancellation of utilities. Bless you. Because that creates really big problems. Because again, if you're doing the buyer's walkthrough and there is no power, there is no gas, now the seller is scrambling to get the power and the gas turned on. Power and the gas company say, well, we can't do it for another 3 business days. Now settlement either gets delayed or now the seller has a big escrow. And it's just not worth like the pennies that you save on the utility bills. So just keep that in mind. Any questions on that? All right. Title paragraph. So a couple things in the title paragraph. So just to make you aware of some worst case scenarios, because we have had these happen before. The title report and survey, if required, will be ordered pursuant to the terms of the settlement paragraph. If such report and survey are not available on the settlement date and were ordered as required, settlement may be delayed up to 10 business days to obtain the title report and survey, after which date this contract at the option of the seller may be declared void and the deposit will be refunded to the buyer. So there is this 10-day period if the title report isn't in or the survey isn't in, and they were ordered within that, what was it, 10 days, right? Settlement, as long as the buyer, 10 days after ratification and submitted the contract can be delayed 10 days based on the contract. A couple other things is if, as determined by the settlement agent, title is not a required condition by the settlement date, this is if the title company is not able to, title is to be of good record, marketable, and insurable by the licensed title insurance company with no additional risk premium. Title may be subject to easements, covenants, conditions, restrictions of record and existence as of the date of ratification. If it's determined by the title agent that it's not in the required condition by the date of settlement, said date shall be automatically extended 30 days, and seller shall promptly take all action necessary to place the title in the required condition prior thereto at seller's expense. So there is, what happens sometimes is you will have, like, let's say the seller they had a private loan on the property 15 years ago with their next door neighbor, right? Lend them $15,000. They put a lien on the property. The buyer, it's long since been paid off, but that attorney who did the lien now is retired. She's living in Florida, impossible to reach, so this allows settlement to be delayed 30 days to get this title issue resolved. So this is another one that, kind of when we're working on all these dates, we're trying to get movers in, we're trying to do all these things that, this can be a tragic event if this happens. And that's why I know some agents who, with every contract they do, they put a post-settlement occupancy agreement in place to kind of take care of get everything resolved on the title before we actually put stuff on moving trucks. So this is just something to worst case scenarios, 10 business days if the title report isn't in, 30 days if the title report, there's an issue with it and it needs extra time to be resolved.
You would know, if you're, babysitting your contract and whatnot, you're gonna know from the title company if there's gonna be an issue. Not always, I know.
Not always. Yeah. I mean, and so title companies tend to not always alarm you with every little
Right.
detail. And sometimes what's happening is, I always call it like the sausage factory, right? Like there's stuff like you don't want to see that's going on the back
Yeah, I
end.
know.
And sometimes in many cases with your deals, there are issues that are going on the back end that the title company is solving
Right,
and they don't need your help with.
right.
And good ones will let you know when they get to a point where, okay, this could cause a delay. But the only way to really make sure that happens is work with a good reputable title company that you have good communication with and that communicates with you. Make sure you get your contract to them as soon as possible, right? Because if you burn 10 days getting the contract to the title company, those 10 days could have been used to resolve this issue, right? Shame on you. So those are a couple things. And then check in, just make sure that like, hey, are we, especially if you've got that buyer or seller who's just, they've got to give notice on their rental, right? Or they're moving out of state and they've got another settlement that's right back to this one kind of thing. Those are things that if you've got those scenarios, you really want to make sure you're up to speed on.
Right.
All right. Any questions on title? A couple things, just as a nuance, if you ever have a client who's looking to buy like a flip or a foreclosure property from an investment company, sometimes they try to sell you the property. And this is why a lot of times they want you to go with their title company, is that sometimes it's not going to be marketable and insurable. It might be insurable, but not marketable, meaning there could be a claim against the property or there could be a lingering issue. It's insurable, but it's not what they call marketable, meaning that the buyer may have to, when they go to sell the property, let's say they go to sell it in 2 years, they may have to clean up this title issue before they're able to sell the property to another buyer. So just keep that in mind, especially if in this day and age of, when we're getting pushed from one title company to another. Sorry, I keep going over this stuff. Surveys. So just so you know, most title companies are not going to do a survey unless your buyer specifically asks for one. And I get that a lot, like after closing, buyer who like wants to do a fence, wants to do a pool, wants to do a deck, wants to do an addition. And they're like, hey, can you send me the survey? And, they didn't buy one, but a lot of times they assume that they paid for one, right? Because when they sold their home 15 years ago, they got a survey with the title work. So just keep that in mind, that if it is something your buyer wants, a survey, that they need to pay for it separately. Most title companies, and again, sometimes in the paperwork, they'll get a letter from the title company. Hey, if you want a boundary survey, yeah, or a line drawing, here's the cost. And sometimes buyers just blow it off thinking it's just another piece of paperwork. So make sure you talk to your buyers about that. All right, questions on that? Um, 20, just because, I've been in business a long time. This used to be an issue. Any heating and cooking fuels remaining in the supply tanks at settlement become the property of the buyer, right? In the old days, we used to have sellers like measure how much oil is left in the tank and the buyer had to pay for the oil. That's not the case anymore, but it's something to keep in mind, especially like in a property like that's vacant and on oil right now. It could be burning through a lot of oil. Let's say someone turned the heat up in the property, the seller didn't notice. You could run the tank out. Seller needs to make sure that there's oil. Petro won't give you like just a little squirt to keep it going. They're going to make sure it's a full tank. So those are things just to keep in mind. All right. A couple differences here in 29 definitions. For the purpose of computing time periods, the first day will be the day following delivery, and time periods will end at 6 p.m. on the day specified. So if you ratified something today and you had a 3-day contingency for your inspection, so ratification day is the 31st, day 1 is February 1, day 2 is February 2, day 3 is February 3rd, and that time period ends at 6 p.m. on February 3rd. MR, the day is till 11:59:59. So sometimes this gets a little confusing if you are mixing some of the forms with an MR and a GCAAR form. So always be careful. I don't recommend using an MR contract. MR does have, GCAAR did build a Montgomery County jurisdictional addendum for MR contracts, but I don't recommend using MR contracts in Montgomery County. The other thing is on ratification. So ratification can happen and sometimes this was confusing people on when ratification happened, right? Like, so what if we ratify the deal tonight and it's after 6 p.m., right? Does that mean that it got ratified on a new day? No. So if you ratify today at 8 p.m., it's ratified on the 31st. Day 1 is still going to be February 1, day 2, February 2. So just a little nuance on that, because that did trip some people up. All right. Any questions on that? All right.
Joe, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Based on the contract that I had last time, you told me that it's not ratified yet because we did not agree. So the title company is working on it, everybody's, but the seller so far they didn't sign, well, they didn't initial what I did. So which means the contract is not ratified yet.
Okay.
And my client is not required to deposit the EMD.
Correct.
Because they did already, but since I don't.
Yeah. So until the contract's ratified, right, you don't have to comply with the terms of the contract because you don't have an agreement. There is sometimes what happens in some of these situations where attorneys can claim that we've got a meeting of the minds, right? Like the only thing that's not ratified, let's say, is the buyers missed right here on page 6. On page 6, they didn't initial this, right? It could be argued that we have a ratified contract. The fact that one initial's missing and everything else has been signed, that we've got a meeting of the minds. That's a legal issue that we don't necessarily, we deal in the black and white. As the real estate agents, we have to go by what the contract says. So they need kind of legal advice on that. But if you, in your case, you've got, so I'm familiar with your case, you've got a couple clauses that have been stricken by the seller and are of serious consequence that your buyer would have to agree to before you have a ratified contract.
Okay.
Yeah, and the date of ratifications is, in all honesty, this box is a convenience. It's not necessarily what's written in stone, right? Because I can put a date of ratification in here, and let's say it's the listing agent, whatever date I want, right? It doesn't mean that that's the enforceable date, right? Really, ratification happens, not because of this date. It happens because of all of the terms have been agreed to and accepted by the clients, and delivery has happened. So sometimes what will happen is this date of ratification is wrong. I always say, like, whenever I'm sending something over and we've been going back and forth like 15 times, and we finally, I think, have come to terms, right? And I'm the last one, or my client's the last one to put that date of ratification or initial or sign or whatever it is. I will reconfirm with the listing agent, hey, I've got today, January 31st, as the date of ratification. Is that the same? Are we on the same page? Right. I'll work on getting confirmation that that's the way they see it too. Because I'd much rather know that we have a problem with the date of ratification now, like on January 31st, than are we on February 3rd when we're trying to figure out, is February 3rd the last day of our contingency or February 4th, the last day of our contingency, right? So the sooner the better. Just looking through here, a couple things. All right, any questions on that? And then I'll dive, we got a couple more minutes. I'll dive a little bit into how GCAAR works different from MR when it comes to addendum of clauses versus their property inspections addendum. And again, I'm very partial to GCAAR for many, many reasons. Really, if there's any substantial contingency, it's going to show up in addendum of clauses A. So it definitely gives you a lot of flexibility, gives you a lot of options. And specifically, the number one contingency that most agents have in their contracts, or used to have in their contracts, and will have again, is inspections. So it's contingent until 6 p.m. on the number of days after ratification for inspections of the property. They exclude lead, radon, and well and septic inspections out of this inspection contingency because those require separate addendums. But everything else under the sun is included. That means mold. That means environmental inspections, soil inspections, pool inspections, roof inspections, chimney inspections, right? Anything you can think of. But here's the caveat I'd give you. Just if you're the buyer's agent and your client wants to have 6 different inspections on this property from 6 different kind of specific inspection companies, let the listing agent know. Because sometimes what happens is they tell their client, like client says, well, how long is the inspection going to be? Because that's seller's kind of nervous how this is going to go. I got to be out of my house. People are going to destroy my house. How many people are going to be here, right? If you show up with an armada of 6 different work trucks coming to do 6 different inspections, that seller might slam the door in your face and lock the door because we've seen that happen before. So prep the listing agent. Well, it's their property, so they're not supposed to do that, but it's also their listing agent, let's say, didn't set the right expectation, right? The listing agent said, oh, well, a home inspection's 2 to 4 hours at most, right? Who's going to come? Well, it's usually the buyer's agent, and maybe a parent, right? So 3 people, right? So if that's the expectation and 14 people show up, it could throw things a little sideways. So just give everyone a heads up if you're going to do multiple inspections. You have the right to do them, right? But I'd much rather make sure that and you'd hate to schedule all these inspections and know that now you got a problem, right? When you're standing at the front door. GCAAR gives you 2 options, right to negotiate and the right to cancel. And you can do both. So actually 3 options, I guess. So right to negotiate, right? Buyer's allowed to do the inspection. And it allows for the buyer to ask for repairs along with the inspection report. The buyer can ask for repairs or stipulate a dollar amount as long as it's allowed by the lender, right? And this is always something to make sure if you are going to negotiate a big credit for inspection items, that it is okay with the lender because they may have a cap on credits that the buyer is allowed to get. And especially if you're already, let's say you have a 3% cap on credits to the buyer, and you've already negotiated 2% credit from the seller to the buyer, and now you need 20,000 to replace the roof and HVAC system, right? You may exceed the 3%. So that's something to keep in mind. There are ways to work around that. So if you do have a situation where you've exceeded your cap for inspection repair credits, you can also have, well, the seller can pay, let's say you picked out an HVAC company already, right? They've got a $10,000 quote to replace both HVAC systems. You can have the seller pay the HVAC contractor at closing instead of giving it to the buyer as a closing cost credit. Make sense? So there are some workarounds if you do get into those situations where you're maxing out your credits. So what happens is buyer does their home inspection, they send the seller the report and their list of items that they want the seller to do. At that first ask list, the seller can counter that offer. They cannot void the contract with that first foray. They must counter it. They can counter it back that we're not doing. You send them a list of 15 items, they cross out all 15. They can counter back that they're not doing one gosh darn thing. So let's say you send a list of 10 items over to the seller. Let's say they counter back with only doing 5 of the items. At that point, the buyer can accept the 5. They can modify that and say, well, we want 5 plus $10,000. They can say that we want 7 items. Or they can also say we're voiding the contract. If they say that they're voiding the contract, at that point, the seller will have 3 days to decide if they will, what they can do is go back and accept the buyer's previous offer. Their previous offer was 10 items, right? Their original list was 10 items. Seller countered that. Buyer said they're voiding it. The seller can go back and accept the buyer's previous offer of 10 items and the contract's still on, right? So sometimes we get into this, we explain it to our buyers that look, like you can void at any time, and that's not necessarily true. You can void if you do your home inspection with B, you can void right off the bat, right? Like, so if you do the home inspection and we cannot live with any of these items in the home, and you have B checked in the contract, you can just void it right off the bat. But once you send that list of 10 items, you can void it, but just keep in mind the seller can come back and accept your previous offer to keep the deal alive. Make sense?
Yeah, I have a question. So
Yep.
if, we just check the ready to negotiate, but we didn't check the ready to cancel. As you said, if we have 10 items and you said 5, and at that point, can the buyer still cancel or
Yep.
void the contract?
Yep.
Even we didn't check the right to cancel?
Yep.
Because the negotiation is successful, it's also part of the evaluation criteria. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. B comes into effect if the buyer does their inspection and before they ever send a request list, their first option,
Yeah.
they can void it
Okay.
without giving an inspection report or trying to negotiate. Once they opt for option A, let's say they have A and B checked, they still can void it, but they just have to keep in mind that the seller could accept their last offer. The other thing is failure to respond after 3 days, it's considered acceptance. So that's just something in some other contracts like NVAR used to be that if you failed to respond, then the contract goes void. So sometimes you'd have an agent who comes over to Montgomery County and is doing a contract and kind of says, well, we're going to take our time to respond. They don't respond, assuming that the contract would be void. But no, it's considered acceptance in GCAAR. So just keep that in mind. Also, if you are working with a Virginia agent. All right. Any questions on inspections? And what I'll do is I'll show you real quick in MR how their inspections work. Have you guys written any MR contracts?
I just wrote one. I prefer GCAAR, but
Yes.
the name of the.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So again, based on where our offices are located, we're like border towns. Like we are on the Howard County border here, on the Carroll and Frederick County border in Clarksburg. That it's important to understand, as much as your office manager dislikes the MR contract, we have to use it, right? I mean, it's part of doing business. So the better you know it, right? The better off you're going to be. Let me get to the last thing we'll go over is the MR property inspections addendum. So MR property inspections addendum is just, it's just a different fit and feel. So in GCAAR world, everything under the sun in the inspections except for radon, lead, and well and septic. Here, the inspection is kind of broken up into every little bit and parcel of an inspection, what it can be. And a couple things to keep in mind, just from the, how MR looks at the inspection, scope and limitations. The purpose of any inspection selected below is to discover unsatisfactory conditions and any other conditions identified. The future condition and performance of the systems and components are not warranted by the seller and are not considered subject to this addendum. Because sometimes what happens is you get your home inspection report and the home inspector says, water heater is at its end of its useful life. Roof, right? Consider replacement, it's at its end of its useful life, right? So what they're kind of doing is finger wagging and saying that that's not the intent of this addendum. It's not to warrant future condition issues. Then in bold, it says this addendum and inspections provided herein is not a purpose of making routine maintenance and or cosmetic nature the subject of further negotiations between the buyer and seller. So what they're saying is, like if there's paint issues or things that they consider routine maintenance, or like have the HVAC system serviced, right? Like potentially that shouldn't be on this list. So there's just, it's slanted very much as to warning the buyer that this is not a open negotiation. In GCAAR, it's an open negotiation. Okay, so it's broken down: structural, mechanical, mold, environmental, radon, chimney, lead-based paint, and additional inspections. So what a lot of agents will do to cover their themselves, because what happens is sometimes you do the inspection, the inspector goes to open up the chimney flue and is like, whoa, like you really need a chimney inspector in here. But if you haven't checked a chimney inspection, you don't have the right to do one. So what we'll sometimes do is either in A at the bottom, it says here, inspection may include but not limited to foundations, flooring, wall systems, components, appliances, and any other conditions as noted. And what some agents will put in here is any further inspections noted by home inspector. Or for G, buyer extent has the right to inspect the property for any further inspections notified by home inspector, right? So that kind of keeps you open that if something does come back during your home inspection, you have the right to go back and you need a mold inspection now, right? Because the inspector found mold, but you didn't put it in your contract. That allows you to have that right to ask for that. And then the B, so 4B is a very confusing paragraph for us in GCAAR world. So what 4B allows, and it's rare that I see this paragraph get accepted, but 4B basically allows the buyer to, similar to paragraph 2B in GCAAR, to do an inspection and then cancel the contract without negotiating with the seller. That's what this 4B is. The buyer would have to initial and the seller would have to initial this box to have that in there. If only the buyer initials, and the seller did nothing to it, you don't have a ratified contract, is basically what this paragraph says. If the buyer initials this and the seller wants to reject that term, they need to cross through this box, and all parties need to initial that this box has been crossed out, or you do not have a ratified contract. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. And then the negotiating terms in GCAAR, it is a seller sends a list, right? Buyer sends a list. Seller has 3 days to respond. Seller responds on day 2, sends over their 5 items. Buyer then has 3 days to respond to that list. They send over 7 items. Seller has 3 days to respond. They send over 6 items. Buyer has 3 days to respond. Buyer sends over 6 items plus $1,000 credit. Seller has 3 days to right, like 3 day back and forth. This is going forever. MR is different. MR, buyer gets 1 swipe at the apple. Buyer sends their list of 10 items over to the seller. Seller has 5 days to evaluate that list. So 10 items sent over. Seller agrees to 5 of the items, right? Now the buyer has 2 days to accept that list or void the contract. There is no more negotiations. It's dead at that point. If you know, there isn't a more back and forth. I don't love this for the sheer fact that what I find is that most buyers, they do their home inspection and they spent 30 minutes falling in love with the property. When you showed them the property, now they spent 3 hours finding out how terrible this property is, right? And now they're freaking out. And so now sometimes they over ask for items to compensate. And what happens then is the seller, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. The seller comes back and says, well, you asked for 20 items, like I'm only doing 1, right? And then, but in MR, that's it, right? Now the seller only has 1. There isn't a chance for any conversation to go back and forth like there is in GCAAR. Because typically what I find that happens is buyers usually send over an overinflated list the first time around. Seller comes back with a equally underinflated list. And then the second round, or the third round technically, is where we start getting compromise, right? Like what's really important here, right? Like we're not gonna replace all of the windows in the house because they're 25 years old, right? Like you knew it going in, but like, the dishwasher is definitely, it's about to die. Like we should replace that, right? So it allows a little more time to kind of work through the emotions. So that's just something to keep in mind with your buyer, that, you got to be really specific and I think very calculated in your first ask, because this is sometimes your only time to ask.
But can't you use that other addendum clauses for MR? For use for MR and GCAAR?
Yep, you can. Yep. But again,
This sometimes really
yeah.
doesn't
In a
allow
perfect
that.
world, yeah. And what Teresa asked was, can't you use GCAAR's addendum of clauses in MR land? Absolutely. You will find though, some agents, they will not want to work with your addendum of clauses. I've had
I know.
one Frederick broker tell me that GCAAR forms are illegal, right? Like was going to call the cops on me for using GCAAR forms. So there's a big pushback. They don't want to,
They don't understand.
they don't understand it. They don't want to work with it. If you do get a MR agent to accept your GCAAR addendum of clauses, I would also be really careful with them just to make sure, like, hey, look, like, because they're used to this 5-day period for the seller to respond, they may take a 5-day period not reading the addendum of clause.
Yeah.
Addendum clause is 3 days. So those are things, and I'm not big on gotcha moments because it never works out, because they will never explain to their client that we just got a gotcha. They just will drag their feet, and your buyer will be mad at you for, like, why can't you get me what I wanted? And the seller was supposed to agree to this. Like, it just creates an issue. So I always, if it comes down to it, I always give the other agent a heads up. Hey, look, like, your report's due at 6 o'clock tonight. Like, just want to give you a heads up, right? If they decided to ignore my messages, at the end of the day, I say, look, dude, I gave you ample notice, right? Like, the fact that you didn't respond to it, that's not my fault.
Right. That's why we get deadlines.
Yep. So that's just a little bit about the inspections. Any questions on these two contracts?
Question, like more of a general question.
Uh-huh.
When it comes to like negotiations and like creating offers and counter offers, like when a buyer puts in an offer, how many days does the seller have to respond to that offer if they decide to accept it?
Yeah, there is no standard time frame that the seller must respond or the buyer must respond to a counteroffer.
Okay.
We talk about this a lot in kind of how you structure a deal and do you put a deadline on your offer, right? Because some buyers are like, well, I want them to respond by, close of business tomorrow, right? February 1st. And you just got to realize where you have leverage and where you don't, right? And sometimes what will happen is I will not put a deadline on initially, but if we feel like, what, they're hanging us out here, right? It's been 3 days, there's DocuSign these days. There is no, in the olden days, it used to be, there was some technical issues with, I got to FedEx the package down to my client, right? Like I got to mail it, I got to fax it to my client and they don't have access to the fax machine until tomorrow. Nowadays, it's pretty easy to do a lot of this stuff by your phone, right? Like, so the speed of of contract negotiations has picked up. But sometimes what I'll do is if I feel like we're not being listened to, then I will put an offer deadline on. Or it's one where, this is something to think about with let's say you are going to, let's say the agent says, we're going to look at offers on Monday, right? And it's Friday, but your buyer really, really wants this house. And they're going to put in a strong offer. You can put in let's say list price is $400,000. We're going to offer you $450 off the bat, no escalation clause, because an escalation clause means that they're going to wait for other offers to come in to kick in. So what you do is you just offer them that $450, but this offer is it's Friday. This offer is only good till Saturday at 6 o'clock. And sometimes agents have used that to force a really strong offer on a seller. But I always recommend in those cases, you don't want to include the escalation clause. You throw the escalation clause out because it really defeats the whole advantage for the seller to take your offer because they really have to wait for other offers to come in for it to make sense. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you can use those deadlines to your advantage, but I always look at, you got to figure out where you've got leverage and where you don't, right? If you're offering them full price at 400, I think you might shoot yourself in the foot by putting you got to respond by Saturday at 6 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
You might piss them off, right? Like that's the last thing you want to do. But if you're giving them a great, great offer, it's okay to put that. Does that make sense?
I have a question. So
Uh-huh.
if for example, if there are two houses the buyer really like, but they have very similar, offer deadline and reviewing date, what is your recommendation? That's a solution
Bless you.
for that?
Yeah. So as their agent, if they can't afford both properties, you shouldn't be writing two contracts for them.
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
So what I do is that because last time we have this experience that they have top two and they two have more or less the same
Yep.
offer deadline on Monday afternoon. So what we do is that for the first one, I try to push. If that first one I know will have a high chance to get rejected, I started to read the second one. But as a buyer, there's not like a backup offer saying, my offer to you is only valid if she rejected my offer. We can't really do that, right?
You can. Yeah. I mean,
Oh, okay.
yeah, you can. Most agents would probably not want to accept your offer if they know that it makes your offer look weak.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not really 100% sold, because if something else comes along, you might cancel this in a week.
Yeah, so that's why I don't
Yeah.
know how to say it. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, you can, but again, it gets into the psychology of do you
Yeah.
make your offer just look
yeah.
look
not
weaker.
as sincere
Yep.
as the other one.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Because that's all like, I mean, right now, the contract negotiations, like I think this is where terms are really critical, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's psychology in the terms and how confident you are. And the sellers are sometimes, and their listing agents are picking two offers. I mean, like sometimes you have them, they're so similar, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's really like, did the lender get back, when I called the lender, was his voicemail box full, right? Because if that's the case, then, and I need the lender in 2 weeks because we're having an issue with something and I can't reach them, like, it's gonna be a problem versus the other lender answered their phone, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's little nuances like that get into it.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I was thinking about doing something last night. I don't know if it's legal or not. It's a house, a pre-foreclosure house. So they want to close as soon as possible. My client need either the closing help or the down payment. So it just
Okay.
has some of the money. And I was thinking about telling the listing agent, so which option do you choose? We can close in 21 days, guarantee if we get all the closing costs from you guys, or we can do 35 days, and then when we get the down payment assistance. So I wasn't sure if that's possible, if that's something that I can do. I didn't do it, but I'm thinking about doing that
Yeah.
because I have to send that offer soon.
Yeah, it's totally doable. I would tell you the best way to do it is write the contract, whatever the buyer prefers, or whatever you think the listing, if you have an idea of what the buyer prefers or the seller prefers, write that into the contract. And then in your addendum of clauses, or add an additional addendum onto the contract where you lay out, an alternative option that allows the seller to counter you with that alternative option.
That's the addendum of clauses, right?
Yeah, you can use addendum clauses or general addendum if you don't have anything else in the addendum of clauses. I think that would be, and we've sometimes done that in home inspection negotiations, right? Where we sometimes are getting to a point where we boiled it down, and it's really like, I'll allow the seller to do something, but as an alternative, we'll pitch them on, just give us $1,000 credit instead. But yeah, in a contract, you can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And is it okay to tell the listing agent that you do have two lenders, like this lender give us 400 and this 340? Like, we can close with this one if you want more money, and we can close with this one if you want like this much.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Like that. All right. Any other questions?
The transfer and recordation tax, you said it's not in GCAAR? I'm drawing a blank.
So the transfer and recordation tax, good question. So transfer and recordation taxes are built into the MR contract. In GCAAR, you have to, it's in the Montgomery County jurisdictional addendum. And thank you for bringing up. One other little note is mediation. MR has a built-in mediation clause, meaning if there's any disputes that arise out of the contract, the buyer and seller agree that they will go through mediation. GCAAR does not have that same mediation clause. There's two different schools of thought on it. Sometimes, mediation helps a lot, right? Like just get the two parties together. But mediation is expensive. I mean, could be anywhere up to $700 to go through mediation. And it's non-binding. So if you still can't resolve it, then you still have to go another legal route. What you'll find, if you have any attorney clients and you're using MR, they will typically strike the mediation clause out of the contract because they know, most attorneys know mediation does not work.
Right.
And what happens is you wind up showing your card. There's a whole mess of things that happen. So just something to keep in mind.
But if you wanted to, you were using the GCAAR, you did want to do mediation. You can still
You can still ask there. It's just not in MR, if the let's say you ask for mediation, the seller refuses, then you can actually charge the seller for any cost it takes to get them to come to mediation. So you could hire an attorney to sue them, and the seller, again, at the end of the day, those are really hard clauses to get a court to enforce. So, I don't love mediation in that it wastes money out of the deal. Sometimes it does. We use it because again, let's say it's $650 for mediation, $500 for interpleader. You're already wasted $1,100 in fees out of the deposit, right? Let's say we're arguing over a $5,000 deposit, right? Like sometimes I'll tell the buyer, like, just, as much as they don't want to hear it, give them $1,000, because it's going to cost you $1,000 to go through this process. If this is really, they will not let in,
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks for hanging in there.
Yeah.